The morning sun was barely up when Linda Rodriguez checked her phone for the 100th time. She'd been working as President Trump's personal secretary for almost 2 years now, and she thought she'd seen it all. Staff meetings at dawn, late-night phone calls, endless paperwork that never seemed to stop. But today was different. Today they were flying to a small European country most Americans had never even heard of. Linda sat in the back of the presidential motorcade, watching the countryside roll by through tinted windows. The trip had come together so fast that she barely had time to pack. 1 minute she was organizing files in the West Wing. The next minute she was being briefed about royal protocols and proper ways to address a king. It all felt a bit surreal, like something out of a movie. The palace came into view and Linda's breath caught in her throat. She'd seen pictures, sure, but nothing prepared her for the real thing. The building rose up like something from a fairy tale, all white stone and golden spires catching the morning light. Flags snapped in the breeze. Guards in ceremonial uniforms stood at attention, their red coats looking like they belonged in a history book. As the motorcade rolled through the massive iron gates, Linda noticed something odd. The palace guards weren't just standing still like statues. They were moving, shifting from foot to foot, glancing at each other. Some of them looked downright nervous. She'd been to enough official events to know what relaxed security looked like, and this wasn't it. The vehicles stopped in front of a grand entrance with marble steps that seemed to go on forever. Linda gathered her things and stepped out, immediately hit by the crisp European air. A man in a dark suit approached their group. He introduced himself as the chief protocol officer and started rattling off instructions in heavily accented English. Please, you must remember, never turn your back to the royal family. Always wait for them to extend their hand first. No photographs in the private quarters. And absolutely never ever touch any of the historical artifacts. Linda scribbled notes as fast as she could, trying to keep up. Behind her, she could hear other staff members whispering to each other, probably as overwhelmed as she felt. The Secret Service agents, though, looked calm as always. Nothing seemed to rattle those guys. They were led through a side entrance away from the main doors where the president would make his official arrival later. The hallways inside were like walking through a museum. Paintings in heavy gold frames lined the walls, showing stern-looking people in old-fashioned clothes. Crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings painted with elaborate scenes. Linda's shoes clicked on polished marble floors that probably cost more than her entire house. But again, she noticed something strange. Palace staff members kept appearing in doorways, watching them pass. Not with curiosity or friendliness, but with worry. 2 women in staff uniforms stood in a corner, having what looked like an intense conversation in their own language. When they noticed the American group approaching, they immediately stopped talking and hurried away in different directions. Linda had learned to trust her instincts over the years. Something was off here. The palace looked perfect on the surface, all gleaming and proper. But underneath there was tension you could almost feel in the air. They were shown to a series of offices that would serve as their temporary headquarters during the visit. Linda started unpacking her laptop and files, setting up her workspace. Through the tall windows, she could see the palace gardens stretching out, perfectly manicured lawns and fountains that probably cost a fortune to maintain. A knock on the door made her look up. A young woman in a palace staff uniform stood there, holding a tray with coffee and pastries. "For you," she said in careful English. "You need anything, you ask me. My name is Petra." "Thank you," Linda said, genuinely grateful. The coffee smelled amazing. "This is beautiful. The whole palace is incredible." Petra's smile flickered for just a second. "Yes, very beautiful," she said. But something in her voice didn't match the words. She set down the tray and turned to leave, then paused. "Be careful here," she said quietly, so quietly Linda almost missed it. "Things are not always what they seem." Before Linda could ask what she meant, Petra was gone, the door clicking shut behind her. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of preparations. The formal state dinner was scheduled for that evening, which meant every detail had to be perfect. Linda coordinated with the palace staff, with the Secret Service, with the other secretaries and assistants. She checked and rechecked the president's schedule, made sure his remarks were printed and ready, confirmed timing for every single moment of the visit. But in the back of her mind, Petra's warning kept echoing. Be careful. Things are not what they seem. Around lunchtime, Linda took a break to use the restroom. Getting lost in the palace's maze of hallways was embarrassingly easy. She turned left when she should have turned right, ended up in a corridor she didn't recognize. As she tried to figure out where she was, she heard voices coming from a nearby room. The door was slightly open. The voices were speaking in the local language, which Linda didn't understand, but the tone was unmistakable. They were arguing. She could hear the stress, the anger in their voices. One voice in particular kept rising, sounding almost desperate. Linda knew she should keep walking, mind her own business. But curiosity got the better of her. She inched closer to the door, careful not to make any noise. Through the gap, she could see two men in palace uniforms. One was older, with gray hair and an elaborate uniform that suggested high rank. The other was younger, maybe in his 20s, looking like he might cry. The older man was gesturing sharply, pointing his finger at the younger one. The young man kept shaking his head, trying to explain something. His hands were trembling. The older man cut him off with what sounded like a command, then turned and stormed out through another door. The young man stood there alone for a moment, his shoulders slumped. He ran his hands through his hair, took a deep breath that Linda could see from where she stood. Then he straightened his uniform, put on what looked like a forced calm expression, and walked out. Linda found the bathroom, her mind racing. Whatever was happening in this palace, it went deeper than just nervous staff. There were real problems here, hidden behind all the gold and marble and ceremony. When she finally made it back to her office, she found a note slipped under her door. It was in English, written in neat handwriting. The alarm test is scheduled for tomorrow. All visitors will be notified in advance. Please do not be alarmed. Linda stared at the note. Why would they need to tell her about an alarm test? And why did it feel less like helpful information and more like a warning? She tucked the note into her folder and tried to focus on work. But as the afternoon wore on, and the palace staff continued their nervous glances and hushed conversations, Linda couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to go very, very wrong. She just had no idea how right she was, or how one simple mistake would expose secrets that the palace had been desperately trying to hide. The evening of the state dinner had finally arrived, and the palace was buzzing with activity. Linda had changed into her formal dress, something appropriate but not too flashy. She'd learned that being staff meant blending into the background while still looking professional. The hallways smelled of flowers and expensive perfume as guests began arriving. But before any of that could happen, there was the security sweep. This was standard procedure, nothing unusual about it. The Secret Service had to check every room, every corridor, every possible entry point before the president could attend any event. Linda had seen it done dozens of times. Usually it was boring and routine. Today would be anything but routine. The Secret Service team worked alongside the palace security forces. Linda watched from her office as they moved through the building with their equipment, scanning, checking, double-checking everything. The palace guards looked even more nervous than they had that morning. One of them, a young guy who couldn't have been more than 25, kept wiping sweat from his forehead despite the cool air. His name tag read Henrik, and Linda had noticed him earlier because he seemed so out of place. While the other guards stood rigid and professional, Henrik kept fidgeting with his equipment, checking and rechecking the security panel he was responsible for monitoring. The head of palace security, an older man with a stern face and a chest full of medals, kept barking orders at Henrik in their language. Whatever he was saying, it wasn't encouraging. Henrik's hands shook as he tried to follow the instructions. Linda was gathering some papers from her office when she heard it. A sound that made her blood run cold. It started low, almost like a hum, then built into a wailing siren that seemed to come from everywhere at once, the kind of sound that tells every cell in your body that something is very, very wrong. For a split second, everyone froze. Then all hell broke loose. Move! 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 The Secret Service agents went into action like a well-oiled machine. Linda barely had time to process what was happening before someone grabbed her arm and pulled her into the hallway. Other staff members were being herded in the same direction, all of them wide-eyed with fear. What's happening? Someone yelled, but nobody answered. There was no time for answers. Linda caught a glimpse of President Trump being surrounded by agents, practically lifted off his feet as they rushed him toward a secure location. Palace guards were running in every direction, some trying to help, others looking just as confused as everyone else. The siren kept wailing, that awful sound drilling into Linda's ears. She could hear shouting in multiple languages. Footsteps pounding on marble floors, doors slamming. The organized, peaceful palace had transformed into chaos in seconds. She was pushed into a room with about a dozen other people, a mix of American staff and palace employees. The door slammed shut behind them, and she heard locks clicking into place. The room was some kind of office, windowless and cramped for the number of people suddenly crowded inside. "Is this a drill?" someone asked, their voice shaky. "Nobody said anything about a drill today," another voice answered. Linda's mind raced. The note she'd found yesterday mentioned an alarm test scheduled for tomorrow, not today. So what was this? Through the thick door, the siren continued its assault on their ears. Linda could hear muffled shouting, the sound of heavy boots running past. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. One of the American staff members, a guy from the advance team named Robert, was trying to get information on his phone. "No signal," he muttered. "These walls must be blocking everything." A palace staff member, an older woman in a formal uniform, had her hand over her mouth. She was whispering something that sounded like a prayer. Next to her, a younger man in palace livery kept trying the door handle, even though they all knew it was locked from the outside. "Please, everyone stay calm," said a woman Linda recognized as one of the senior palace administrators. Her English was good, but her accent was thick with stress. "This is procedure. We stay here until security gives the clear signal." "Procedure for what?" Robert demanded. "What kind of threat are we talking about?" The administrator opened her mouth to answer, but before she could, the door burst open. Everyone jumped back. A Secret Service agent stood there, his face all business. "Linda Rodriguez?" he called out. "Here." Linda raised her hand, her voice not quite steady. "You're being moved to a more secure location. Come with me." Linda grabbed her bag and followed him out, aware of the other staff members watching her go. The hallways were still chaotic, but slightly more organized now. She could see agents positioned at regular intervals, all of them speaking into their radios in low, urgent voices. They took her down a flight of stairs she hadn't known existed, through a narrow corridor that looked much older than the fancy parts of the palace. The walls here were plain stone, the lighting minimal. This was the real backbone of the building, the parts tourists never saw. She was brought to a larger room, something that might have been a basement meeting room. President Trump was there, along with his chief of staff and several other senior staff members. Some members of the royal family were there too, looking shaken and angry. The siren finally stopped. The sudden silence was almost as jarring as the noise had been. "What in God's name is going on?" Trump's voice boomed in the quiet. He didn't look scared, just annoyed and impatient. The head of palace security stood in front of everyone, and Linda could see the man's face had gone pale. He started speaking in his own language, then seemed to remember his audience and switched to heavily accented English. "There has been a mistake," he said. And the way he said mistake made it sound like the understatement of the century. One of the guards during the security check, he activated the emergency system. By accident. There is no threat. I repeat, there is no threat. The room exploded with reactions. Trump's chief of staff started yelling about incompetence. The royal family members began arguing with each other in their own language. The head of security looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. And in that moment, Linda realized something important. This wasn't just about one guard making a mistake. The panic she'd seen, the chaos, the way everyone had reacted, it all pointed to something bigger. This palace, with all its beauty and ceremony, was running on a broken system. The guards weren't properly trained. The security protocols weren't working. And from the way the royal family was arguing, it was clear that this was a symptom of deeper problems. She looked around the room at the angry faces, the stressed expressions, the barely contained panic. They'd only been here for one day, and already the cracks in the palace's perfect facade were showing. The head of security kept apologizing, over and over, but his words were drowned out by the arguments erupting around him. Linda pulled out her phone, which finally had signal again down here, and started taking notes. Something told her this was a story that needed to be documented. She had no idea just how right she was, or how much more she was about to discover in the hours to come. The arguments in the secure room showed no signs of stopping. Linda stood in the corner, trying to make herself invisible while her mind worked overtime processing everything she was seeing. This was the kind of scene that never made it to the news. The messy reality behind diplomatic smiles and official photos. President Trump had been escorted to an even more secure location, about 10 minutes after the all-clear started to come through. The royal family went with him, along with the highest-ranking officials. That left Linda and several other staff members stuck in this room with palace employees who were no longer bothering to hide their frustration. A translator had been brought in early on, a middle-aged woman named Katerina, who worked for the palace. At first, she'd been careful about what she translated, only passing along the polite official statements. But as time dragged on and tempers flared, she seemed to give up on filtering. Now she was translating everything, and what Linda was hearing made her eyes go wide. Two palace officials were in a heated argument near the door. One was the head of security, the same man who'd made the embarrassing announcement about the false alarm. The other was a senior royal aide, someone high up in the palace administration. Their voices kept rising, both of them gesturing wildly. "He's saying this is the third time this month," Katerina translated quietly, almost under her breath. "The third time the security system has failed." Linda's head snapped toward her. "Third time?" Katerina glanced around nervously, then nodded. "The head of security is defending his department. But the aide is saying they've been covering up problems for months. Training hasn't happened. Equipment is outdated. The budget that was supposed to go to security improvements went somewhere else." "Where?" Linda asked, though she wasn't sure she should be pushing for more information. Katerina hesitated, then leaned in closer. "That's what they're arguing about. The security chief says he requested funds. The aide says the requests were denied by someone higher up. They're both trying to blame someone else." The argument was getting louder. Other palace staff members in the room were watching now, some of them looking uncomfortable, others nodding along like they'd heard all this before. Another voice joined in, a younger man in a formal uniform, who looked like he might be from the palace's administrative office. Katerina kept translating, her voice getting quieter as the revelations got bigger. "He's saying it's not just security. He's talking about other departments having problems too. Staff shortages, budget cuts that don't make sense. He's saying people have been complaining for months, but nobody listens." Linda pulled out her phone and opened her notes app, trying to look casual while she typed everything down. She'd learned a long time ago that memory wasn't reliable in high-stress situations. You had to document things while they were happening. Robert, the guy from the advance team, had moved closer to listen too. He caught Linda's eye and raised his eyebrows, a silent communication that said he was thinking the same thing she was. This was way bigger than just one guard pressing the wrong button. The head of security suddenly switched to English, maybe realizing there were Americans in the room, or maybe just so upset that he didn't care anymore. I tell them many times, we need training, we need new equipment, we need more staff. But always they say no money, make it work with what you have." The royal aide shot back in their language and Katerina translated. "He's saying the security chief is trying to blame others for his own failures. That the money was provided but was mismanaged. That's a lie." The security chief switched back to English, his face red. "Show me the records. Show me where this money went." The aide's expression changed. Just for a second, Linda saw something flash across his face, fear maybe, or guilt. Then it was gone, replaced by cold anger. He said something sharp in their language and walked away from the conversation, leaving the security chief standing there fuming. The room had gone quiet. Everyone had witnessed the exchange. It was the kind of public argument that would never happen if things were running smoothly. The kind of breakdown that revealed just how much pressure everyone was under. Linda noticed one of the younger palace staff members, a woman who'd been standing quietly in the corner. She was staring at the royal aide with an expression that looked like disgust. When she noticed Linda watching, she quickly looked away, but not before Linda saw tears in her eyes. Katerina touched Linda's arm gently. "You should know," she said in a voice so low Linda had to strain to hear. "Many of us who work here, we see things. Problems that get ignored, rules that get broken. We want to speak up, but—" She trailed off, the implication clear. Speaking up could cost people their jobs or worse. "How long has this been going on?" Linda asked. "Months, maybe longer. It's hard to say when it started. Things just got worse and worse, little by little. Then suddenly we look around and realize how bad it's gotten." Another palace employee, a man who looked like he might work in maintenance based on his uniform, spoke up in accented English. "The young guard, Henrik, he is new. Only 3 weeks here. They put him on important duty with almost no training. This is not his fault. This is their fault. He gestured vaguely upward toward wherever the decision-makers were. So why don't you report it? Robert asked, his voice not unkind but genuinely curious. There must be someone who can fix this. The maintenance man laughed bitterly. Report to who? The king, the queen? They are told only what their advisors want them to hear. The advisors protect each other. And people like us, he gestured to himself and the other lower-level staff. We are easy to replace. Speak up, get fired, someone new comes in who doesn't know anything. The problems continue. Linda felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't just bureaucratic dysfunction. This was systematic suppression of information, possibly for years. The perfect image the palace projected to the world was exactly that, an image with rot underneath. The door opened and a senior palace official entered, someone even higher ranking than the arguing aide. He clapped his hands once, sharply. The situation is resolved, he announced in perfect English. You will all be escorted back to your quarters. The state dinner will proceed as scheduled with only a brief delay. We apologize for the inconvenience. Inconvenience. Linda almost laughed at the understatement. They'd been locked in a secure room after a blaring alarm, had witnessed a massive argument revealing serious institutional problems, and he was calling it an inconvenience. As they were led out of the room, Katerina walked beside Linda. Be careful what you say, she whispered. They will want to keep this quiet. I'm sure they will, Linda replied, her mind already working through the implications of everything she'd learned. They were taken back through the palace corridors, which had returned to their previous state of calm elegance. You'd never know that chaos had erupted here just an hour ago. The marble gleamed. The paintings hung perfectly straight. The guards stood at attention looking professional. But Linda saw it all differently now. She saw the cracks in the paint, the worry in the guards' eyes, the way staff members hurried past without making eye contact. She saw a system barely holding itself together through appearance and pressure, and she knew with absolute certainty that this story was far from over. Linda was exhausted. The adrenaline from the alarm incident had worn off, leaving her drained and jittery. She'd been escorted back to a temporary holding room while the palace staff prepared for the evening's events. The state dinner would go on, of course. Nothing could stop the show, not even a security crisis. The room they'd put her in was small but elegant, probably some kind of private office for palace staff. A desk sat in the corner covered with papers and folders. Bookshelves lined one wall. A small window looked out over the gardens, which were lit up beautifully in the gathering dusk. Linda checked her phone. Still another hour before she needed to be ready. She sat down heavily in one of the chairs, trying to process everything that had happened. The argument, the revelations, the clear dysfunction underneath the palace's perfect surface. It was a lot to take in. She stood up and walked to the window, stretching her back. The view was actually quite pretty. She could see people moving around down in the gardens, probably making final preparations for some outdoor portion of the dinner. Everything looked so peaceful from up here. As she turned away from the window, her elbow knocked against a stack of papers on the desk. They slid across the polished wood surface, some of them falling to the floor. Great, she muttered, bending down to pick them up. Just what I need. She started gathering the papers, not really looking at them, just trying to get them back in order. But then something caught her eye. A number, then another number. Her brain, trained from years of handling budgets and financial reports, automatically started processing what she was seeing. These were financial documents, budget reports, expense accounts, something that looked like payment records. And the numbers weren't adding up. Linda knew she shouldn't be looking at these. They weren't her documents, weren't her business. She should just stack them neatly and leave them alone, but she couldn't help herself. The accountant in her was screaming that something was very wrong with these figures. She sat down at the desk and spread the papers out, organizing them by date. Her heart started beating faster as patterns emerged. Funds allocated for security equipment, but no corresponding purchase orders. Budget line items for staff training that showed payment going out, but to companies she'd never heard of. Money disappearing into categories that seemed deliberately vague. She pulled out her phone and started taking pictures. Click, click, click. She knew she was crossing a line here, but she couldn't stop. This wasn't just poor bookkeeping. This looked like deliberate fraud. Someone was stealing money from the palace, and they'd gotten good at hiding it. One document in particular made her pause. It was a payment approval form, signed by someone with an important-sounding title. The amount was significant, equivalent to maybe $50,000 in American money, supposedly for security system upgrades, but the date was from 6 months ago, and the head of security had just been arguing that no money had come to his department. So where did the money go? Linda heard footsteps in the hallway and quickly gathered the papers, stacking them back where they'd been. Her hands were shaking slightly. She moved away from the desk just as the door opened. Katerina, the translator from earlier, stepped inside. She looked tired, her formal clothes slightly rumpled. "Oh, I'm sorry," she said. "I was told this room was empty. They want us to wait in the main gathering area." "No problem, I was just leaving," Linda said, trying to sound casual even though her heart was racing. Had anyone seen her looking at those documents? But as she started to leave, Katerina closed the door instead of opening it wider. She looked around the room, then at Linda. "You saw the papers," she said quietly. It wasn't a question. Linda's mind raced through possible responses. Deny it? Play dumb? But something in Katerina's expression made her take a different approach. "Yes," she admitted. Katerina nodded slowly, like this was what she'd expected. "Then you know. You understand now what some of us have suspected." "How long have you known?" Linda asked. "Known for certain? I don't. But suspected? Maybe a year, maybe longer." Katerina moved to the desk and looked down at the papers. "I work in the administrative offices sometimes. I see things. Numbers that don't match. Payments that don't make sense. Once I asked about it. I was told very firmly to focus on my own duties." "Who's behind it?" Linda asked, though she wasn't sure she'd get an answer. Katerina shook her head. "That's the question, isn't it? Someone high up. Someone with access and authority to approve payments and move money around. But it's hard to know who exactly. There are layers of officials, everyone covering for everyone else." "The royal family," Linda said. "Do they know?" "I don't think so. Not the king, anyway. He's a good man, but he's surrounded by advisors who control what information reaches him. The prince, maybe he suspects. He's asked questions before, but he's young, and the old guard doesn't listen to him much." Linda thought about what she'd witnessed earlier, the arguments and accusations. "This is bigger than just the alarm going off." "Much bigger," Katerina agreed. "The alarm, the security problems, they're symptoms. The real disease is corruption. Money being stolen, staff being kept quiet, problems being buried. And now you Americans are here and suddenly all the cracks are showing." There was a knock on the door. Both women jumped. A palace staff member opened it, speaking rapidly in the local language. Katerina answered him, then turned to Linda. "They're ready for us. We need to go." As they walked toward the door, Katerina grabbed Linda's arm gently. "What you saw, what you know now, it puts you in a difficult position. These people, whoever they are, they've worked hard to keep this quiet. They won't like someone asking questions." "Are you saying I should keep quiet?" Linda asked. Katerina's expression was complicated, torn between fear and hope. "I'm saying be careful. But also, maybe someone from outside needs to see this. Someone who can't be silenced as easily as we can." They joined the other staff members in the hallway, moving toward the formal gathering area. Linda's mind was spinning. She had photos of financial documents that appeared to show fraud. She'd witnessed a security crisis that revealed systematic dysfunction. She had testimony from palace staff about corruption and cover-ups. But what was she supposed to do with it? She was just a secretary, here for a diplomatic visit. Getting involved in another country's internal problems could create an international incident. Her job was to support the president, not investigate foreign governments. On the other hand, could she really just ignore what she'd seen? These people were being robbed, their security compromised, their concerns dismissed, and it was happening in a country that was supposed to be an American ally. The state dinner proceeded with all the expected pageantry. Linda stood in her assigned position, watching the formalities play out. The king gave a gracious speech. President Trump responded with appropriate diplomatic language. Everyone smiled for the cameras, but Linda couldn't stop thinking about those papers on the desk, about the numbers that didn't add up, about Katerina's quiet plea for help. She looked around at the palace officials in their formal wear, wondering which of them were involved, which were just keeping quiet, which maybe didn't even know. The dinner lasted for hours, course after course of elaborate food that Linda barely tasted. Her mind was elsewhere, working through possibilities, considering consequences, weighing her options. By the time it was over and she finally made it back to her temporary quarters, she'd made a decision. She pulled out her phone and looked at the photos she'd taken, clear enough to read, showing the discrepancies she'd noticed. She backed them up to her cloud storage, then sent copies to her personal email. Whatever she decided to do with this information, she needed to make sure it was preserved. Evidence had a way of disappearing when powerful people wanted it gone. Linda lay in bed that night staring at the ornate ceiling of her palace room and wondered what she'd gotten herself into. The next morning started with another alarm, though this time it was just Linda's phone waking her up at 6. She'd barely slept, her mind churning through everything she'd learned. The photos on her phone felt like they were burning a hole in her pocket, even though that was ridiculous. The schedule for the day included a private meeting between President Trump and the king, followed by a tour of the palace's historical sections. Linda's job was to stay close, take notes, handle any last-minute needs. Standard stuff, except nothing about this visit felt standard anymore. She was standing in a side corridor checking her tablet when the alarms went off again. This time they were different, not the wailing emergency siren from yesterday, but a loud, persistent beeping. Her stomach dropped. Not again, but the reaction was different this time too. The Secret Service moved quickly but without the same panic. Someone had clearly briefed them that the palace's alarm system was unreliable. They secured the president and moved him to a safe location, but it was more procedural than frantic. Linda found herself being herded into another secure room. This one was bigger than yesterday's, looked like it might be some kind of council chamber. Heavy wooden table in the center, portraits on the walls, thick carpet that muffled footsteps. She wasn't alone for long. Other staff members filed in, looking annoyed more than scared this time. Then, to her surprise, members of the royal family started arriving too. The king wasn't there, probably secured in his own location, but others were. The prince came in first, and Linda recognized him from last night's dinner. He was in his early 30s, tall and serious looking. Right behind him came the princess, the king's daughter, maybe in her late 20s. She looked furious. Then came an older man who Linda had learned was the king's brother, the uncle. He walked in like he owned the place, which in a way she supposed he did. His expression was one of barely contained irritation. Behind them came various advisors and officials, including the royal aide who'd been arguing yesterday. The room was getting crowded. Someone closed and locked the door, and that's when things got interesting. The princess rounded on her uncle immediately. She didn't even wait for everyone to get settled. "Again," she said in English, probably for the benefit of the Americans in the room. "Another failure. Another embarrassment. How long are you going to let this continue?" The uncle's eyes narrowed. "Mind your tone. This is not the time or place for—" "Not the time?" The princess's voice went up. "When is the time? We've been saying there are problems for months. You keep telling us everything is fine, but it's clearly not fine." The prince stepped forward, trying to calm his sister. "Let's not do this now. We have guests." "The guests are exactly why we should do this now," the princess shot back. "Maybe with outsiders watching, someone will finally have to tell the truth." Linda tried to make herself invisible in the corner, but she was watching everything. This was way beyond diplomatic awkwardness. This was a family falling apart. The uncle drew himself up. "I will not be spoken to this way by what?" The prince interrupted, and Linda was surprised by the steel in his voice. "By your niece and nephew? By people who actually care about this country and its reputation. I care about this country." The uncle snapped. "Everything I've done has been for the good of—" "For the good of who exactly?" The prince took a step closer. "Because from where I'm standing, the only person benefiting from the current situation is you and your friends." The room went dead silent. That was a serious accusation, even Linda could tell. The American staff members were looking at each other with wide eyes, probably thinking the same thing she was. Should we even be here for this? The royal aide tried to intervene. "Your Highness, perhaps this conversation would be better held in private." "Private?" The princess laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Everything is always private. That's the whole problem. Things happen in private, decisions get made in private, money moves in private, and by the time anyone realizes something's wrong, it's too late." Linda's ears perked up at the mention of money. She glanced at Katharina, who'd ended up in the same room again. The translator's face was carefully neutral, but her eyes were sharp, taking in everything. The uncle's face had gone red. You have no idea what you're talking about. You're children playing at politics. The real work of running this palace, this country. It requires difficult decisions that you're too naive to understand. Naive? The prince's voice was dangerously quiet now. I've seen the reports. Or rather, I've seen the reports you allow us to see. I've noticed what's missing. The gaps in the budget. The appointments that don't make sense. The complaints from staff that mysteriously disappear. You're suggesting what exactly? The uncle demanded. I'm suggesting that you've been using your position to benefit yourself and your associates. I'm suggesting that the security failures, the budget problems, the staff issues, they're all connected. And I'm suggesting that you've been counting on Father being too trusting to question you. The princess nodded vigorously. Henrik, the guard who set off the alarm yesterday? He's been here 3 weeks. 3 weeks? And you put him in charge of critical security systems. Why? Because he's the nephew of your friend's business partner. You're filling this palace with unqualified people who owe you favors instead of hiring people who can actually do the job. The uncle looked like he might explode. This is outrageous. I won't stand here and be accused, then sit down and explain. The prince shot back. Explain why the security budget was approved, but the equipment was never purchased. Explain why training programs were funded but never happened. Explain where the money went. Linda's heart was pounding. This was exactly what she'd seen in those financial documents. The prince had clearly been doing his own investigating, but without proof it was just accusations. The royal aide stepped forward again. Your Highness, these are serious claims. Do you have evidence? The prince hesitated. Just for a second, but it was enough. I have questions that deserve answers, he said. But his voice had lost some of its certainty. The uncle saw the opening and took it. Questions, theories, suspicions, but no proof because there's nothing to prove. You're young and you want to make changes, I understand that. But sometimes you see conspiracies where there's just ordinary incompetence and bad luck. Bad luck? The princess said incredulously. Our security system fails 3 times in a month and you call it bad luck? Equipment fails. People make mistakes. It happens. The uncle's voice had become smooth, reasonable. Linda recognized the technique, the way guilty people try to sound innocent by being calm. I understand you're frustrated. These incidents are embarrassing. But jumping to conclusions about corruption helps no one. The door unlocked and opened. A senior official stood there. The all clear has been given. It was another false alarm. A malfunction in the system. We're working to fix it. The uncle smiled, a cold expression that didn't reach his eyes. You see? A malfunction. Perhaps now we can all calm down and stop throwing around wild accusations. As people started filing out, the prince caught his uncle's arm. Linda was close enough to hear him say quietly, This isn't over. I'm going to find the truth. The uncle pulled his arm away. Be very careful, he said, just as quietly. You're playing a game you don't understand. Some doors once opened can't be closed. It sounded like a warning, or maybe a threat. Linda watched them go, her mind racing. The royal family was fractured. Accusations flying, but without hard evidence, nothing would change. The uncle would keep covering things up. The problems would continue, unless someone provided that evidence. She touched her phone in her pocket, thinking about the photos stored there. She had proof. The question was, what was she going to do with it? The visit was finally winding down. In a few hours, they'd be on Air Force One heading back to Washington, and this entire chaotic trip would be over. Linda should have felt relieved. Instead, she felt sick to her stomach. She was in her temporary office packing up her things when the chief of staff walked in. David Chen was a political operator to his core, someone who'd been around Washington long enough to have seen everything. He closed the door behind him, which immediately put Linda on edge. We need to talk, he said, sitting down without being invited. Linda's hands stilled on the papers she'd been organizing. About what? About what you saw, what you heard, what you might be thinking of doing with that information. His voice was calm, almost friendly, but there was steel underneath. I don't know what you mean, Linda said, knowing it was useless but trying anyway. David gave her a look that said he wasn't stupid and neither was she. Linda, you're a smart woman. You've been taking notes, paying attention. I saw you during that mess yesterday, watching everything. And I know you were in the room today when the royal family had their little blow-up. I was just doing my job. Your job is to support the president, period. David leaned forward. Not to get involved in another country's internal politics. Not to play investigative reporter. Not to stick your nose into things that don't concern you. Linda felt her face getting hot. I haven't done anything. Not yet. But you're thinking about it, aren't you? David's eyes were sharp. You're thinking that you saw something wrong, something that should be exposed. You're thinking maybe you have some kind of duty to speak up. The fact that he'd read her so accurately was disturbing. Linda didn't answer. David sighed and sat back. Look, I get it. You seem like someone with principles, and that's admirable. Really. But you need to understand the bigger picture here. The bigger picture where we ignore corruption and fraud. The bigger picture where we maintain relationships with our allies. David's voice rose slightly before he controlled it. This country, small as it is, matters strategically. Naval base access, intelligence sharing, UN votes. We need them on our side. So we just pretend everything's fine? We let them handle their own internal problems, David corrected. It's not our job to be the world's police, and it's definitely not your job to blow up an important diplomatic relationship because you saw some questionable paperwork. Linda stared at him. It was more than questionable. It was evidence of theft. Someone is stealing from the palace, probably for years, and the security problems it's causing could get people hurt. Their people. Their problem. David stood up. Linda, I'm going to be very clear with you. If you go public with anything you learned on this trip, you will be fired. Immediately. And your career in Washington will be over. Nobody will hire you, not after you've shown you can't be trusted to be discreet. Is that a threat? It's a fact. It's how this world works. David moved toward the door, then paused. But more than that, think about what you'd actually accomplish. You cause an international incident. Relations between our countries get damaged. The president looks bad because it happened on his watch. And do you really think anything would change in the palace? They'd just crack down harder, cover things up better. The people you're trying to help would probably end up worse off. After he left, Linda sat down heavily in her chair. Her hands were shaking. Part of her was angry at being threatened. But another part of her was wondering if he had a point. She pulled out her phone and looked at the photos again. What did she really think was going to happen if she exposed this? Would it actually help anyone? Or would it just make things worse while ending her own career? There was a soft knock on the door. Katerina stepped in looking worried. I heard the chief of staff was here. He looked angry when he left. He was warning me to keep quiet, Linda said tiredly. Katerina closed the door. And will you? I don't know. Linda rubbed her face. He made some good points about making things worse. About this not being my business. It's not your business, Katerina agreed. But it's the right thing. She sat down across from Linda. Can I tell you something? My mother worked in this palace for 30 years. She loved this country, loved the royal family. But in her last years, she saw the corruption starting. She tried to speak up, tried to warn people. She was fired, blacklisted, could barely find work after that. I'm sorry, Linda said quietly. She died 2 years ago. And you know what she told me before she died? She said her only regret was that she didn't shout louder, didn't make more noise, didn't do whatever it took to make people listen. Katerina's eyes were bright with tears. She said silence in the face of wrong is its own kind of crime. Linda felt something twist in her chest. But what if exposing it makes things worse? What if it damages the alliance between our countries? Alliances built on ignoring wrongdoing are fragile anyway, Katerina said. Real friendship between countries or people means telling hard truths. After Katerina left, Linda sat alone with her thoughts. She pulled up her contacts and found the name of a journalist she'd met at a Washington event a few months back. Jack Reynolds, someone with a reputation for serious investigative work and international connections. Someone who might know what to do with information like this. Her thumb hovered over the call button. One tap, one conversation, and she'd have started something she couldn't stop. Her career would probably be over. She'd make powerful enemies. Life would get very complicated very fast, but if she did nothing, she'd keep her job, keep her nice safe career path. And these problems would continue. The theft would go on. The security would stay compromised. People like Katerina and the other palace staff would continue to be silenced and ignored. Linda thought about Henrik, the young guard who'd been set up to fail, given responsibility he wasn't trained for because he had the right connections. She thought about the prince and princess, trying to fight corruption but without evidence to prove it. She thought about Katerina's mother, dying with regret. She thought about what kind of person she wanted to be. Before she could second-guess herself, she tapped the call button. It rang 3 times before Jack answered. Jack Reynolds. Jack, hi, this is Linda Rodriguez. We met at the Press Association dinner a few months ago. Sure, I remember. What can I do for you? Linda took a deep breath. I'm calling about a story. A big one. But I need to know that anything I tell you is completely confidential until we decide together how to move forward. There was a pause. She could almost hear Jack's reporter instincts kicking in. Okay, you have my attention. What are we talking about? International corruption, fraud, security failures. And evidence to back it all up. Linda's voice was steady now, her decision made. But it's complicated, and I need help figuring out the right way to handle it. Where are you right now? About to board a plane back to Washington. Can you meet me tomorrow? Somewhere private? Yes. Good. Send me an encrypted email with the basics, nothing too detailed yet. We'll figure out the rest in person. After she hung up, Linda sat staring at her phone. There was no going back now. She'd made her choice. For better or worse, the truth was going to come out. She finished packing, her movements automatic while her mind raced ahead to all the consequences coming her way. David's warnings echoed in her head. Her career was probably over. She'd made powerful enemies. But Katerina's words echoed louder. Silence in the face of wrong is its own kind of crime. Linda closed her suitcase and headed for the motorcade, ready to face whatever came next. 2 weeks had passed since Linda returned from the palace visit. 2 weeks of normal work, pretending everything was fine, while secretly meeting with Jack Reynolds to plan how to handle the story. 2 weeks of barely sleeping, constantly looking over her shoulder, wondering if someone had figured out what she was doing. Jack had been thorough. She had to give him that. He'd verified everything she gave him, reached out to his own sources in the country, connected dots she hadn't even seen. What had started as financial irregularities had mushroomed into a full investigation of palace corruption going back years. They decided to start anonymously. Jack would publish the story without naming Linda as the source. It was safer that way, at least at first. Give the palace a chance to respond, see how they handled it. The story broke on a Tuesday morning. Linda was at her desk in the White House trying to focus on a briefing document when she saw the headline pop up on her newsfeed. Palace in crisis. Investigation reveals years of corruption and security failures. Her heart started pounding. She clicked on the article. Jack had done excellent work. He laid out the financial evidence, the mismanagement, the unqualified appointments, the security failures. He'd even gotten quotes from unnamed palace staff members, corroborating everything. Within an hour, it was everywhere. Every major news outlet was picking up the story. Linda's phone started buzzing with messages from colleagues asking if she'd seen the news. She responded with what she hoped looked like appropriate surprise. But the palace's response was not what she expected. Within hours, they issued a statement denying everything. They called the allegations baseless and false. They claimed the financial records were being misinterpreted. They insisted that any security issues were minor and being addressed. Linda felt her stomach drop. They were going to stonewall, just deny everything and hope it went away. That evening, Jack called her. They're not budging. I've got palace officials calling me everything from reckless to biased. They're threatening lawsuits. What do we do? Linda asked. We need more sources, more evidence, something they can't deny. He paused. You said you took photos of those documents. If we could publish those, that would expose me as the source. I know. I'm not saying you have to. But without hard evidence they can't dismiss, this story might just fade away. They'll outweight us. Linda thought about Katerina, about the prince and princess trying to fight corruption, about all the palace staff who'd wanted to speak up but were too afraid. If the story died now, nothing would change. It would all have been for nothing. Give me a day, she told Jack. Let me think about it. That night, Linda lay awake, weighing her options. Going public meant everything David had warned her about would come true. She'd lose her job. Her reputation would be destroyed in certain circles. Life as she knew it would be over. But staying quiet meant letting corruption win. Meant watching from the sidelines while people got away with theft and lies. Meant being the kind of person who knew the truth but did nothing with it. She thought about her mother, who'd raised her to believe that doing the right thing mattered more than being comfortable. She thought about all the whistleblowers throughout history who'd lost everything to expose wrongdoing. She thought about what kind of person she wanted to be when she looked back on this moment years from now. The next morning, Linda walked into the White House for what she knew would be the last time. She'd already typed up her resignation letter. She met with Jack and gave him permission to use her name and publish the documents. The second article hit that afternoon. White House secretary goes on record. I saw the evidence myself. Jack had used her photos, her testimony, everything. The financial documents were right there for everyone to see. There was no denying it now. Linda's phone exploded. Calls from reporters, messages from colleagues, texts from friends asking what was happening. She ignored most of them, but she did answer when the White House Chief of Staff's office called to summon her immediately. David Chen was waiting for her, along with 2 other senior officials. Their faces were stone. What have you done? David's voice was cold. My job, Linda said, surprised by how calm she sounded. I documented evidence of corruption in a foreign government. I reported it. You violated every protocol we have. You've created a diplomatic nightmare. The president is furious. The president should be thanking me. We were forming closer ties with a corrupt government. Better to know now than find out later when it's even more complicated. That's not your call to make. David slammed his hand on the desk. You were staff. Your job was to support the president's agenda, not freelance as some kind of crusading journalist. Linda pulled her resignation letter from her bag and placed it on the desk. I know. That's why I'm resigning, effective immediately. David stared at the letter. You think that makes this okay? You think quitting fixes this? No. But it's what I need to do. Linda looked at each of them. I know you're angry. I know you think I betrayed the administration. But I saw evidence of serious crimes. I had a choice between loyalty to the administration and doing what I thought was right. I chose what I could live with. She left the White House that afternoon carrying a box with her personal belongings. Cameras were waiting outside, reporters shouting questions. She kept her head down and didn't answer any of them. Not yet. Jack had advised her to lay low for a few days, let the story develop. The international response was swift. The European countries' parliament demanded investigations. Opposition politicians called for the king to take action. Other countries that had dealt with the palace started asking questions about their own agreements and contracts. Most importantly, palace staff started coming forward. Katerina was one of the first, giving an interview to a local news outlet about what she'd witnessed. Others followed. The tide of evidence became impossible to ignore. The palace tried to hold the line for a few more days, but it crumbled quickly. An independent investigation was announced. Several high-ranking officials, including the king's brother, were suspended pending investigation. The head of security resigned. Documents started being reviewed. Through it all, Linda stayed quiet. She did one interview with Jack, where she explained her reasoning and what she'd seen. She kept it factual, avoided making it personal, focused on the evidence. Let the facts speak for themselves. The backlash was real. Some people called her a traitor. Online comments said she'd damaged American interests. Some former colleagues wouldn't return her calls. Job applications she sent out went unanswered. David's prediction about her career being over seemed to be coming true, but there were other responses too. Messages of support from people she'd never met. Thank you notes from citizens of the country where the corruption had occurred. Inquiries from transparency organizations about speaking at events, and one message that meant more than most of the others. It was from Katerina. My mother would be proud of you. I am proud of you. Thank you for not being silent. A month after the story broke, Linda got a call from a nonprofit organization that worked on government transparency and accountability. They needed someone with her experience and her courage. The pay was less than half what she'd made at the White House, but the work mattered. She took the job. Looking back on the whole experience, Linda couldn't say she'd do everything the same way. The cost had been high. Her old life was gone. But when she thought about the alternative, about staying quiet and keeping her comfortable job while knowing what she knew, she couldn't imagine making a different choice. Some doors, once opened, couldn't be closed. The palace uncle had been right about that, but he'd meant it as a warning. Linda had come to see it as the truth. Once you saw wrong being done, once you really understood what was happening, you couldn't unsee it. You couldn't pretend you didn't know. You had to decide what kind of person you wanted to be. And Linda had made her choice. 6 months after the story broke, Linda sat in a small cafe in Washington, scrolling through news articles on her tablet. The investigation into palace corruption had concluded, and the results were everything she'd hoped for and more. 3 senior officials had been arrested on fraud charges. The king's brother had been forced to step down from all official duties and faced possible prosecution. Millions of dollars in stolen funds had been traced and were being recovered. The financial systems of the palace were being completely overhauled with independent oversight. But what struck Linda most was the human element of the changes. Henrik, the young guard who'd accidentally set off the alarm that started everything, had become an unlikely voice for reform. He'd given several interviews, talking openly about being put in a position he wasn't trained for, about the pressure and fear palace staff lived with, about the culture of silence that had allowed problems to fester. His honesty had resonated with people. Instead of being the embarrassed scapegoat, he'd become a symbol of what was wrong with the old system and hope for what the new one could be. The palace had even rehired him after he completed proper training, part of a new commitment to professional standards over personal connections. Linda's phone buzzed. It was a video call from Katerina. She answered, and Katerina's smiling face filled the screen. "I had to call you," Katerina said, barely containing her excitement. "Have you seen the news? They just announced the new oversight committee. Real independence, real authority. We actually did it. Things are actually changing." Linda felt warmth spread through her chest. "How are things at the palace?" "Really?" Katerina's smile softened. "Different. So different. People can speak up now without fear. We have real training programs. The security system has been completely replaced. And you know what? The royal family, they're actually listening now. The prince chairs the new oversight committee. He sends me updates, asks for feedback from staff. It's like we're finally seen as people instead of just servants. And you? How are you doing?" "Good, really good." Katerina paused. "Some of the old guard still hate us, the ones who spoke up. But most people are grateful. My mother's old friends, they contact me to say she would be proud. That helps." After the call ended, Linda sat back with her coffee, thinking about the journey of the past 6 months. It hadn't been easy. The job offer she'd expected after going public never really materialized. Many in Washington still saw her as someone who couldn't be trusted with sensitive information. Her name was still controversial in certain circles, but the nonprofit work was fulfilling in ways her White House job never had been. She spent her days helping other whistleblowers navigate the terrifying process of coming forward. She testified before Congress about the need for better protections. She spoke at universities about ethics and accountability. The pay was terrible compared to what she used to make. Her apartment was smaller. She couldn't afford the restaurants and lifestyle she'd once enjoyed, but she slept well at night, which was something she hadn't been able to do in those 2 weeks between seeing the corruption and deciding to expose it. Her tablet buzzed with a notification. Another article, this one from a major international news outlet. The headline read, "1 year later, how a secretary's courage reformed a kingdom." Linda almost didn't click on it. She'd read enough articles about herself, some praising, many critical, but this one caught her attention because it mentioned Henrik. She started reading. The article was a comprehensive look at the reforms that had swept through the palace. New training programs that actually trained people, security systems that worked, financial oversight that prevented theft. But more than that, a cultural shift. Staff were encouraged to report problems. Concerns were investigated instead of buried. Merit mattered more than connections. The piece interviewed Henrik extensively. He talked about how different his job was now, how he felt respected and supported instead of set up to fail. He talked about the friends he'd lost in the old guard, people who blamed him for their own corruption being exposed. But he also talked about the new relationships he'd built with colleagues who wanted to do their jobs well. Near the end of the article, Henrik was quoted saying something that made Linda's eyes water. "That alarm going off was the best accident of my life. It exposed problems that needed to be exposed. And the American secretary who refused to stay silent. She saved this place. She saved us." Linda closed her tablet and stared out the cafe window. The weight of the past 6 months sat heavy on her shoulders. All the criticism and lost opportunities and burned bridges. But reading Henrik's words, knowing that real people's lives were genuinely better because of choices she'd made, it felt worth it. Her phone rang. The caller ID showed it was Jack Reynolds, the journalist who'd helped break the story. "Have you seen the latest numbers?" Jack asked without preamble. "The palace has recovered over 40 million in stolen funds. 40 million that's going back into actually running the place properly." "I saw," Linda said. "There's more. 3 other European countries have launched their own investigations into similar issues. Your story started a wave. People are looking at systems they took for granted and asking if money is going where it should." "That's good," Linda said. "Meaning it." "It is. And hey, there's something else. I've been talking to some publishers. They're interested in a book. Your story, the whole experience. What you saw, how you made your decision, what happened after. It would be a good opportunity to tell your side properly." Linda hesitated. "I don't know. I'm not trying to be a celebrity here. You're not. But there are a lot of people who face similar choices, who see something wrong and don't know what to do about it. Your story could help them. And honestly, you deserve to tell it yourself instead of letting others define it for you." "Let me think about it," Linda said. After hanging up, Linda thought about the idea. A book, her full story in her own words. The fear, the doubt, the cost. But also the reasons, the conviction that some things were more important than personal comfort. She pulled out her laptop and started typing, not committing to anything, just seeing how it felt to put her thoughts into words. She wrote about the morning they'd arrived at the palace, about the nervous guards and the pristine marble hiding rot underneath. She wrote about hearing the alarm, about being locked in rooms with people whose desperation to be heard finally overcame their fear. She wrote about finding those financial documents, about the moment she decided to take photos, about Katerina's mother dying with regret over staying silent, about the choice between comfort and conscience. The words flowed easily, surprisingly so. Maybe Jack was right. Maybe this was a story worth telling properly. A year after the alarm incident, Linda was invited back to the country. The palace wanted to honor the people who'd helped bring about reform. She almost declined. Being celebrated for doing what seemed like basic decency felt strange, but Katerina convinced her. People need to see that speaking up can work. That courage can win. Come, please. So Linda went. The palace looked the same from the outside, all that white stone and gold. But walking through those familiar hallways, she felt the difference. Staff members smiled and made eye contact. The nervous energy was gone. There was a sense of purpose instead of fear. Henrik greeted her personally in his crisp new uniform with proper insignia. "Thank you for coming," he said, shaking her hand firmly. "Thank you for everything." The ceremony was small and private, just the royal family and key staff. The prince presented her with an award for service to transparency and reform. In his speech, he talked about how outside perspective sometimes sees what those inside have become blind to, how courage from unexpected places can change everything. Linda accepted the award with a short speech. She talked about ordinary people facing extraordinary choices, about the staff members who'd lived with dysfunction for years, waiting for someone to listen, about how change requires people willing to risk comfort for truth. That evening at a small dinner, the king himself thanked her privately. "You cost me my brother," he said quietly, "and probably saved my country. I'm not sure whether to thank you or resent you." "You can do both," Linda said. "I think that's fair." He laughed, a genuine sound. "Yes, I suppose so." Flying home the next day, Linda thought about how strange life had become. A year ago, she'd been a secretary with a stable job and a clear career path. Now she worked for a nonprofit, wrote articles about accountability, spoke to people who faced similar choices to the one she'd made. Her life was smaller in some ways, bigger in others. She'd lost professional connections but gained real friendships with people who valued the same things she did. She'd lost money but gained purpose. She'd lost certainty but gained the ability to look at herself in the mirror without flinching. The book came out 6 months later. It sold well, though not spectacularly. But Linda got letters from readers who'd faced their own corruption, their own moments of choice. Some had spoken up. Some were still trying to find the courage. All of them thanked her for showing that ordinary people could do extraordinary things. And sometimes, late at night when doubt crept in and Linda wondered if she'd thrown away her career for nothing, she'd reread those letters. She'd think about Henrik doing his job properly now,